Hizmet attempts to bring people together who would otherwise not ever come into contact and give them the opportunities to see one another's humanity. I love Turkey because of the involvement with the Hizmet, because of the members of the Hizmet. There are people who participate from all kinds of groups, but because they contribute. My name is Nancy Pittman. I'm the Dean and a professor at Phillips Theological Seminary here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm also a Christian and a follower of the way of Jesus and a leader in my own religious community. I got to know the Hizmet movement through my friend Yusuf Dundar. We have been working together for several years on interfaith activities here in Tulsa. I have a really good opinion of the Hizmet movement. I've had an opportunity now to go to Turkey and interact with people who are involved in that movement and had a really wonderful time getting to know other people who are interested in the same things I'm interested in. I had never heard of Mr. Fethullah Gulen until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. There were some reports on National Public Radio here in the United States about his work and about how he has lived here for, almost 20 years, I think. And talking about his interest in peace and in mutual respect and in finding ways for us to live together as practitioners of our own religions, but to live in peace together. And I'm very impressed by that. Mr. Fethullah Gulen has offered a different kind of face of Islam to people who aren't that familiar with Islam. In other words, here in the United States, we hear lots and lots about terrorists who claim the Islamic badge as their own. But Mr. Fethullah Gulen helps us see a different picture of Islam, and that's one contribution. His other contribution is his kind of constant call to mutual respect, to mutual engagement, and of course to education, and especially for education for women. I'm not an Islamic scholar, so I can only speak about my own viewpoint and my own engagement with people in the Hizmet movement. But in my judgment, Mr. Gulen helps interpret the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad in a way that people can understand more clearly. People, especially in the West, can understand more clearly. He helps us see that the Prophet Muhammad also offered peace to the world and also offered us a way to speak to one another without always being disrespectful, without always accusing one another of not being from God. And I'm very appreciative of that and think it's a helpful way of mutual understanding. I've been thinking about what are the noteworthy aspects of the Hizmet movement compared to other civil societies around the world. One of the things that really strikes me is the way that the people who are involved in the Hizmet movement are very committed to it. They offer their wealth and their time and their talents to promoting the concerns of the movement. I've also noticed that the people who are in that movement are very close friends with one another, but they offer that friendship to people all around them. So it's not just a closed group, but it's a very open group in which friendship and all of the benefits of friendship are offered to everyone who comes into contact with the people of the movement. The interfaith activities of the Hizmet movement have been, to me, the most apparent of all of the things that the Hizmet movement does, partly because that's where I learned about the Hizmet movement, is in my own interfaith commitments. I think that the effort to try to get people from all levels of society to meet one another is a very important effort. I'm very appreciative of Hizmet's attempt to bring together people of the United States with the people of Turkey so that we can actually have conversation and get to know one another. Sometimes interfaith movements tend to focus on leaders, and that's a wonderful focus, but Hizmet attempts to bring people together who would otherwise not ever come into contact and give them the opportunities to see one another's humanity. I think that's a really unique and special contribution to the whole work of interfaith dialogue. I am very appreciative of Hizmet's emphasis on education because I'm an educator. So of course I think that it's really, really important to offer opportunities for people to study science, technology, the humanities, literature, the riches of one's own culture. I'm also especially appreciative of Hizmet's emphasis on the education of women and of bringing young girls and giving them those opportunities and allowing them opportunities to explore all ranges of fields and professions. And I have visited a Hizmet movement school when I was in Turkey. We had the opportunity to go to an elementary school, and the children and the teachers greeted us warmly and shared with us their own work. When I was in Turkey, I had the opportunity to visit the headquarters of Kimse Yok Mu, and there I heard about all of the things that that organization is doing for people who are in trouble around the world. I'm very impressed. I think it takes all of us to become a part of healing the hurts that come from disasters and war and disease and poverty, and I think it's a really wonderful part of the Hizmet movement to be involved in this. We live in a very cynical age. People here in the West have seen people that we thought were shining stars, even saints, as we might say in the Christian tradition, have fallen from their high vantage point in a variety of ways. So it's easy for us to be cynical. And it's easy for us, before we understand, to judge other movements and say, oh, nothing can be that good. From what I've seen of the Hizmet movement, I'm sure that there are people who participate from all kinds of motives. But because they contribute to the good of all of humanity, we should appreciate and value that work without dismissing it or claiming that no one is that good, when in fact any contribution to the good of the world, it should be lifted up and celebrated. I came to love Turkey because of my involvement with the Hizmet movement, because of the invitation of members of the Hizmet movement to come to Turkey. And while we were there, we were treated with great kindness and generosity and lots of hospitality. My favorite moment of that trip came on a morning in Kütahya. The members of my group had stayed the night before with members of the Hizmet movement. We'd stayed in their homes and they had fed us. We had had a party together. The women had a tea the night before, and the men had gone to a Turkish bath. And the next morning we all gathered at one of the homes of the members of the Hizmet movement, and we had breakfast. And we stood later in the garden outside. It was a fruit garden. It was an orchard. There were all kinds of trees, and we stood under the trees, and together we prayed for peace. The Christians prayed for peace in their way, and the Muslims prayed for peace in their way. Shared together a hope for a future in which there would be no more war and no more conflict, especially over religion. My only suggestion for improvement in the Hizmet movement has to do with lifting up the work that is already going on. As I traveled in Turkey, I learned that the Hizmet movement was very involved in the education for women. My hope is that Hizmet would find ways to identify and train female spokespersons so that they too could be involved in speaking out on behalf of the movement. I think that women here in the United States would be really, really interested in hearing from women in Turkey and in the Hizmet movement about their own experiences. And that's the only thing I would say right now. The Dialogue Institute here in Tulsa represents Turkey and represents Muslims in a way that really helps Christians here in Tulsa understand Islam. This is a predominantly Christian area, and there are many, many, many Christians who do not understand Islam and do not know Muslims, and in fact hardly know anyone from anywhere outside Oklahoma. So the Dialogue Institute gives us opportunities to, again, get to know people in a low-threat, safe way. The Dialogue Institute has an annual Turkish festival that many of us participate in and eat Turkish food and talk to Turkish people. It also hosts a number of events for people to come in, just relax and get to know each other around common interests.
And I think in a time when we often think of Islam as being a violent religion or overly political, the writings of Mr. Gulen are a refreshing breath.
To me, Fethullah Gulen is a spokesman for peace and moderation at a time when both are severely threatened.